On your knees, the woman commanded, her voice a whip crack in the quiet of the small bookstore. That's where people like you belong. On your knees, begging. Amara Washington stood frozen behind the worn wooden counter of her shop, the scent of old paper and stale coffee suddenly suffocating. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat of humiliation and disbelief. The woman, all sharp angles and expensive perfume, held up her phone, its camera lens a cold, unblinking eye. A small red icon in the corner of the screen pulsed with a word that made Amara's stomach clench. Live. I want everyone to see this, the woman, Karen, announced to the digital ether. I want everyone to see the filth that this establishment attracts, and the kind of person who allows it. Her manicured finger jabbed through the air, first at the elderly, disheveled man huddled in a corner chair, then squarely at Amara. The man flinched, pulling a threadbare blanket tighter around his shoulders. He said nothing. He just looked down at the floor, as if hoping it might swallow him whole. Amara's own gaze dropped to the scuffed linoleum. The jeering faces of the online comments, unseen but keenly felt, burned her skin. The silent judgment of the few other customers in the store was a physical weight, pressing down on her, forcing the air from her lungs. She was trapped, a bug under glass. She was a business owner. She was a daughter trying to honor her parents' legacy. She was a good person. But in that moment, under the harsh glare of a phone screen and the venom of a stranger, she was none of those things. She was just a target, a problem, a failure. I'm talking to you, Karen snarled, stepping closer to the counter, her face a mask of contempt. Are you deaf? Or just stupid? I said. On your knees! Amara's world had shrunk to this single, horrifying moment, this public crucifixion, this demand for her submission. She felt a tremor start in her hands, a deep, rattling fear that threatened to shatter her completely. What she didn't know, what no one in that room could possibly know, was that the woman she was filming was not just harassing a struggling shop owner. She was live-streaming her own destruction to an audience of over 2 million people. And the quiet man in the corner, the object of her scorn, was about to change Amara's life forever. Let me take you back to the morning before everything fell apart, and then came together in the most spectacular way imaginable. The day had started like any other. With a sigh, Amara woke to the pale gray light of a Tuesday filtering through the single window of her tiny studio apartment. The room was sparse, a collection of necessities rather than comforts. A bed, a small table with 2 chairs, a kitchenette with a hot plate that only worked on one side. Her existence had been pared down to the essentials. Every dollar and every ounce of energy funneled into one singular, all-consuming purpose: keeping the page and pint alive. The bookstore had been her parents' dream, a cozy nook carved out of the city's unforgiving landscape, a place where stories could breathe and neighbors could gather. After their accident a year ago, it became her inheritance. Not a gift, but a burden. A beautiful, crushing burden of love and debt. She dressed in her usual uniform, worn jeans, a faded t-shirt from a local charity run, and a thick cardigan that had been her mother's. Its familiar weight was a small comfort. She looked in the small, cracked mirror by the door. Her reflection seemed tired. The dark circles under her eyes were permanent residents now. Her hair, usually a proud halo of coils, was pulled back in a simple, functional bun. There was no time for vanity. There was only time for work. Breakfast was the last of the instant oatmeal. She ate it standing up, staring at the stack of bills on her small table. The pink one was on top. The eviction notice for the store. It gave her until the end of the week. 4 days. 4 days to come up with 3 months of back rent. An impossible sum. A mountain she could not climb. She felt the familiar prickle of tears behind her eyes but blinked them back fiercely. Crying wouldn't pay the rent. Crying wouldn't restock the shelves. Crying wouldn't honor the memory of her parents, who had poured their entire souls into that little shop on Elm Street. Her father's booming laugh echoing off the bookshelves, her mother's gentle hand guiding a child to the picture book section. Those memories were all she had left. She would not let them be evicted. She grabbed her keys and her thin coat, stepping out into the damp chill of the morning. The city was waking up, a grumbling giant of traffic and noise. Her car, a 20-year-old sedan that coughed more than it purred, was parked 2 blocks away to avoid the paid street parking. The walk was brisk, a necessary jolt to her system. As she walked, she practiced the mantra her grandmother had taught her as a child. Find one good thing. Just one. It was a game they used to play, a way to fend off the shadows. Today, the good thing was a patch of stubborn dandelions pushing their way through a crack in the sidewalk. A small, defiant burst of yellow against the grim concrete. It was enough. It had to be. The car started on the 3rd try, a small victory that felt disproportionately huge. The drive to the bookstore was short, a journey through a neighborhood in transition. Gleaming new condo buildings towered over the older 2-story brick storefronts. The air smelled of construction dust and money. Money that she did not have. Money that was actively trying to squeeze her out. She parked in the small alley behind her shop and let herself in through the back door. The air inside was cool and still, thick with the comforting aroma that was the shop's signature scent. A blend of aging paper, roasted coffee beans, and a hint of her mother's lavender cleaning solution. Home. This place was more of a home to her than her own apartment. She flicked on the lights. The warm glow illuminated the comfortable chaos of the space. Books were stacked everywhere, on shelves, on tables, in precarious towers on the floor. The furniture was a collection of mismatched armchairs and small wooden tables, each one donated or found at a thrift store. It wasn't sleek or modern. It was loved. It was real. Her first task was always the coffee. She filled the large percolator, using a precious scoop of the good coffee beans, the ones she reserved for her customers. For herself, it was always the cheap instant brand, a small, secret sacrifice. While the coffee brewed, she went to the front window. On a small ledge outside, she placed 3 children's books. A sign, hand-painted by her father years ago, read, "Free for little readers. Take a story home." It was a tradition he had started, and one she refused to give up, no matter how tight things got. The books were always gone by the end of the day. Next, she checked the community cupboard by the counter. It was a simple corkboard where customers could pay for a coffee in advance for someone who couldn't afford one. A small act of anonymous kindness. This morning, there were 2 paid tickets pinned to the board. She smiled. Another good thing. Despite the looming eviction, despite the gnawing anxiety in her gut, Amara held on to these small rituals of goodness. They were her anchors. They were proof that even in a world that felt increasingly transactional and cold, kindness still had a currency. It was the one thing she felt she had in abundance, even when her bank account was empty. The bell over the door chimed, announcing her first customer of the day. It was Mr. Henderson, a retired postal worker who came in every morning for a black coffee and the daily crossword. "Morning, Amara," he said, his voice a gravelly rumble. "Morning, Mr. Henderson," she replied, her voice brighter than she felt. "The usual. You know it." She poured his coffee, the simple act a familiar, comforting rhythm. This was the heart of the store, the people, the connections. This was what the developers with their cold glass towers and luxury boutiques didn't understand. This was community, and it was worth fighting for. She just had to figure out how. By midday, the rain had started, a cold, persistent drizzle that matched the gloom in Amara's heart. Business was slow. A few regulars came and went, their brief, warm interactions like sparks in the dark. But sparks didn't pay the bills. The pink eviction notice felt like it was burning a hole in the pocket of her jeans. She was in the back, trying to make the numbers work. She spread out her bills, her bank statements, and the shop's earnings log on a small, cluttered desk. The numbers stared back at her, stark and unforgiving. It was a landscape of red ink and negative balances. Hope was a foreign country she couldn't afford a ticket to. She had exactly $47 to her name. That had to cover her food for the rest of the week, gas for the car, and somehow, miraculously, a down payment to appease her landlord. It was laughable. It was heartbreaking. She closed her eyes, resting her forehead on the cool wood of the desk. The weight of it all was immense. The grief for her parents was a constant, dull ache. The stress of the debt was a sharp, stabbing pain. She was so tired. She was tired of fighting. She was tired of being strong. For a fleeting moment, she allowed herself to imagine just stopping, letting the store go, selling the remaining books, packing her few belongings, and just walking away. But where would she go? And who would she be without this place? The thought was a cold void that scared her more than any eviction notice. The store wasn't just a building, it was the last piece of her parents. It was her identity. Letting it go would be like losing them all over again. The bell over the front door chimed, pulling her from her spiral of despair. She took a deep breath, pasted on a smile, and walked back into the main part of the shop. The man standing just inside the doorway was dripping wet. Rainwater ran in rivulets from his matted gray hair and soaked the shoulders of his worn army-style jacket. He was old, but it was a hard-to-place age, the kind that comes from a difficult life rather than the simple passage of years. His face was etched with deep lines, and his eyes, though clouded with weariness, held a flicker of sharp intelligence. He clutched a tattered backpack to his chest, like a lifeline. He looked lost and cold, so incredibly cold. He shivered, a tremor that shook his entire frame. He wasn't looking at the books. He was just standing there, soaking in the warmth of the small shop, a ship seeking a moment's refuge from a storm. Mrs. Gable, a neighborhood gossip who was browsing the mystery section, caught Amara's eye. She gave a slight, almost imperceptible shake of her head and mouthed the words, "Be careful." Her expression was a mixture of fear and distaste. It was a look Amara had seen before, the casual dismissal of a person based on their appearance, the assumption that poverty was a contagion. Amara felt a familiar pang of indignation. Her mother's voice echoed in her mind. You don't judge a book by its cover, and you don't judge a person by their clothes. She ignored Mrs. Gable's silent warning. She walked towards the man, her smile genuine now. "Welcome," she said softly. "You look like you could use a place to dry off. Please come in." The man looked up, surprised. His eyes, a startlingly clear blue, met hers. He seemed to be bracing himself for a different kind of reception. He seemed to be waiting to be told to leave. "I don't have any money," he rasped, his voice hoarse from the cold or disuse. "That's not what I asked," Amara replied gently. "It's a nasty day out there. Can I get you a hot coffee? Or some tea?" The man hesitated, his gaze flickering towards the community cupboard. He saw the 2 paid tickets hanging there. A flicker of understanding, and then relief, washed over his tired features. "Coffee," he said, the word barely a whisper. "Coffee would be good." "Of course," Amara said. "Why don't you have a seat over there?" She gestured to the most comfortable armchair in the shop, the one by the faux fireplace with the electric logs that gave off a comforting, if artificial, glow. As the man shuffled towards the chair, Mrs. Gable approached the counter, her book held tightly in her hand. "Are you sure that's a good idea, dear?" she whispered conspiratorially. "He could be, you know, dangerous. Or he might steal something." "He's just cold, Mrs. Gable," Amara said, her voice firm but polite. "And everyone deserves a little warmth." Mrs. Gable sniffed, unconvinced. "Well, it's your business." She paid for her book and scurried out, casting one last disapproving glance over her shoulder. Amara sighed. She knew Mrs. Gable wasn't a bad person, not really. She was just afraid of what she didn't understand. But fear was a poor excuse for a lack of compassion. She prepared the coffee, her hands moving with practiced efficiency. As she did, she made a decision. A community cup coffee was one thing, but the man looked like he hadn't had a solid meal in days. Her stomach rumbled, reminding her of her own meager dinner plans. The $47 in her pocket felt heavy. She thought about the $10 bill she had set aside for her own groceries. It could buy a few packages of ramen, maybe some bread. It wasn't much, but it was something. She looked at the man, who was now huddled in the armchair, his hands outstretched towards the electric fire. His shivers were starting to subside. He looked small and vulnerable. He looked like someone's father, someone's son. The choice was not really a choice at all. It was an imperative, a moral reflex. She walked over to the small deli next door, the rain soaking her thin cardigan in seconds. She spent the $10 bill on a hot roast beef sandwich and a small bowl of soup. It was a costly decision. A decision her logical, panicked mind screamed against. That was her food for the next 2 days. But her heart, the part of her that was her mother's daughter, knew it was the only thing to do. When she returned, she placed the food on the small table next to the man's chair. "Here," she said quietly. "You should eat something." The man looked from the food to her face, his blue eyes wide with a profound, aching surprise. He looked like no one had shown him this kind of kindness in a very long time. A single tear tracked its way down his weathered cheek. "Why?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion. Amara just shrugged, a small, sad smile on her face. "Because my mom taught me to. Now eat before it gets cold." She retreated behind the counter, giving him his privacy. She watched him eat slowly at first, then with a hunger that was painful to witness. She felt a pang of her own hunger, but it was overshadowed by a different feeling. A quiet, solid sense of rightness. This was who she was. Even if she lost everything, she would still have this. She would still have her humanity. The man finished his meal. He looked stronger, the weariness in his face replaced by a quiet dignity. He looked around the shop, his intelligent eyes taking in the overflowing shelves, the hand-painted signs, the general air of loving disarray. Amara, feeling he needed more than just a meal, went into the small back room. She had a box of things she was meaning to donate. Inside was a thick, clean wool blanket. It wasn't new, but it was warm. She also grabbed a paperback copy of a classic adventure story, one of her father's favorites. She brought them out to him. "Here," she said, "for when you have to go back out there, and something to read." He took the blanket, his rough fingers stroking the soft wool. He looked at the book, then back at her. "Thank you," he said. And this time, his voice was clear and strong. "Thank you, Amara." She was startled that he knew her name, but then remembered the name Amara's Answers on a small sign by the register where she recommended books. He settled back into the chair, wrapped in the warm blanket, and opened the book. The shop was quiet again. The only sounds the soft rustle of a turning page and the steady drumming of the rain against the window. For a moment, Amara felt a sense of peace. In this small corner of the world, for this one man, she had made a difference. It felt like enough. It wasn't. The bell over the door chimed again, but this time it was a different sound. Not the gentle announcement of a customer, but a sharp, angry jangle, as if the door had been thrown open rather than pushed. In walked Karen Fletcher. Karen Fletcher was less a person and more a force of nature, a storm of sharp business suits, aggressive ambition, and undisguised contempt for anything she deemed beneath her. She was the head of the local Business Improvement Association, a title she wielded like a weapon. Her personal project was the revitalization of Elm Street, which in her vocabulary meant tearing down the old and replacing it with the expensive. She had made no secret of her desire to acquire the entire block, and Amara's little bookstore was the last, stubborn holdout. She strode into the center of the shop, her heels clicking sharply on the floor. Her eyes, cold and calculating, swept the room, her nose wrinkled in a permanent expression of distaste. She looked as out of place in the cozy bookstore as a shark in a goldfish pond. "Washington," she said, her voice clipped and devoid of any warmth. It was never Amara, always just Washington, a dismissal in a single word. "Hello, Karen," Amara said, her voice carefully neutral. She braced herself. Every encounter with this woman was a battle of attrition. Karen's gaze landed on the man in the armchair. Her perfectly sculpted eyebrows shot up, and her face contorted into a mask of theatrical outrage. "What is that?" she demanded, pointing a finger tipped with a blood-red nail. "What is that doing in here?" The man, Elias, looked up from his book, his calm expression unwavering. "That is a customer," Amara said, her voice low and tight. "And he is welcome here." Karen let out a short, sharp laugh that was utterly devoid of humor. "A customer? Don't be ridiculous. That is a vagrant. A piece of filth you've allowed to track dirt into your already dingy little shop. Do you have any idea what this does to the perception of this neighborhood?" "He's not bothering anyone," Amara insisted, her own anger starting to simmer. "He's just reading a book." "He is bothering me," Karen snapped. "His very presence is a health code violation, a blight. I have investors touring this block tomorrow, and I will not have it infested with people like that." She was talking about him as if he wasn't there, as if he were an object, an infestation to be cleared. The dehumanization was stunning in its casual cruelty. "This is my store," Amara said, her voice trembling slightly but firm. "And I decide who is welcome here." "Oh, is it?" Karen said with a cruel smirk. "For how much longer? I saw the notice on the door. You're being evicted. And when you are, I will be the one to buy this building, bulldoze it, and build something respectable. Something clean." The public declaration of her private shame hit Amara like a physical blow. She felt her face flush. It was then that Karen's eyes lit up with a particularly nasty brand of inspiration. She pulled her smartphone from her designer handbag. With a few swift taps, she started a live broadcast. "You know what?" she said, her voice suddenly sweet and conspiratorial, aimed at her phone's camera. "I think everyone needs to see what's happening on Elm Street. I think the world needs to see why progress is so important." She turned the phone, framing both Amara and the man in the shot. "Hello, everyone. Karen Fletcher here, coming to you live from this bookstore," she said, loading the word with disdain. "I want you to see what we're up against. This is what happens when you let these people run businesses. She's encouraging vagrancy right here on our streets." Amara stared in horror. The little red, live icon seemed to pulse like a malevolent heart. She could see the number of viewers ticking up rapidly. 10,000. 50,000. 200,000. Karen Fletcher apparently had a significant online following, people who tuned in for her brand of self-righteous outrage. "Look at him," Karen said, zooming in on the man. "Just sitting there, probably drunk, or worse. And the owner here," she swung the camera back to Amara, "she thinks this is acceptable. She thinks this is good business." The humiliation was a hot, suffocating wave. Amara felt naked, exposed. Her deepest struggles turned into a spectacle for a faceless, jeering mob. She could almost hear the comments, the flood of hatred and judgment that was surely filling Karen's screen. Karen then did something that pushed the situation from cruel to monstrous. She opened her wallet, pulled out a crumpled $5 bill, and threw it on the floor in front of the man's chair. "Here," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "Here's some money for a bottle of cheap wine. Now get out. Get out of my neighborhood." The man, Elias, did not look at the money. He simply closed his book, his finger marking his page, and looked at Karen with an expression of profound disappointment. It was not anger. It was not fear. It was a deep, weary sadness. That look seemed to infuriate Karen more than any angry retort could have. "What are you looking at, you old bum? I said get out." She turned her fury back on Amara. "And you are a disgrace, a failure. Your parents would be ashamed of you, running their dream into the ground and turning it into a homeless shelter. You don't deserve to have a business." The mention of her parents was a knife in the heart. The raw, unhealed wound of her grief was torn open for the world to see. Tears finally welled in Amara's eyes, hot and shameful. "Now," Karen said, her voice dropping to a low, menacing hiss as she stepped right up to the counter. "I'm going to make this very simple for you. You are going to apologize. To me, and to my 2 million followers, for endangering this community. And then you are going to get on your knees and beg me to reconsider tearing this place down. It might make for good television." She held the phone up, right in Amara's face. The lens was a black hole, threatening to swallow her whole. The number of viewers had now surpassed 1 million. 1 million people watching her being torn apart. "On your knees," Karen commanded again, her voice a whip crack in the stunned silence of the bookstore. "That's where people like you belong. On your knees, begging." Amara stood rooted to the spot, her body trembling. Her mind was a whirlwind of shame, rage, and a deep, bone-weary despair. This was it. This was the bottom. A public execution of her dignity. Every eye in the room, and 1 million more online, were on her, waiting to see if she would break, waiting to see if she would kneel. And then a new voice cut through the tension. a voice that was calm, clear, and carried an unexpected weight of authority. "That will be quite enough." Every head turned. The voice belonged to the man in the armchair. He was standing now, the wool blanket falling to the floor around his feet. He was no longer hunched or shivering. He stood tall, his posture straight, his blue eyes clear and sharp as ice. The weary vulnerability was gone, replaced by an aura of quiet, unshakable power. Karen Fletcher scoffed, turning the phone on him. "Oh, look, the bum speaks. What are you going to do? Threaten me?" The man, Elias, ignored her. His gaze was fixed on Amara. "Are you all right, young lady?" he asked, his voice filled with a genuine paternal concern that made Amara's throat tighten. She could only manage a small, shaky nod. Elias then turned his attention back to Karen. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. "You have made several grave errors in judgment this afternoon, madam," he said, his tone measured and precise, like a scholar delivering a lecture. "Oh, have I?" Karen sneered into her phone. "Enlighten me, Professor." "Your first error," Elias continued, "was assuming that a person's worth is tied to their appearance, a common but fatal mistake." He took a step forward. "Your second error was believing that cruelty is a form of strength. It is, in fact, the most profound kind of weakness." He paused, letting his words hang in the air. "And your third, and most immediately consequential error," he said, his voice dropping slightly, "was harassing this young woman in my building." A confused silence fell over the room. Karen's smirk faltered. "Your building? What are you talking about? You're a homeless derelict." Elias reached into the pocket of his tattered jacket, but instead of the crumpled tissues or loose change one might expect, he pulled out a phone. It was a stark contrast to his attire, a sleek, impossibly thin device made of black metal and glass, the latest model from a high-end, exclusive tech company. He tapped the screen once and held it to his ear. He spoke only 3 words. "Chen, it's time." Karen stared at the phone, a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. "What is that? A toy? Who are you calling? Your imaginary friends?" Less than 2 minutes later, the quiet of Elm Street was broken by the sound of sleek, powerful engines. 3 black sedans, the kind used by diplomats and billionaires, pulled up silently in front of the bookstore. They seemed to materialize out of the rain, their dark, polished surfaces gleaming under the gray sky. A man in a perfectly tailored gray suit emerged from the lead car. He was sharp, focused, and moved with an air of brisk, no-nonsense efficiency. He entered the bookstore, his eyes scanning the scene, taking in Karen, her phone, Amara's tear-streaked face, and finally, Elias. The man's entire demeanor changed when he saw Elias. He bowed his head slightly in a gesture of profound respect. "Mr. Vance," he said, his voice crisp and clear. "You called." The name hung in the air, charged with meaning. Vance, as in Elias Vance, the reclusive, eccentric, multi-billionaire founder of Zenith Innovations, one of the largest and most influential tech companies in the world. A man famous for his philanthropic work, but also for disappearing for weeks, sometimes months at a time, living anonymously amongst the very people his foundations sought to help. A man who owned vast swaths of real estate across the country, managed by a labyrinth of holding companies. Karen Fletcher's face, which had been flushed with triumphant rage, went completely, deathly pale. The color drained from her cheeks as if a plug had been pulled. Her jaw went slack. The phone, still broadcasting live to what was now over 2 million people, slipped from her limp fingers and clattered to the floor. "Vance?" she whispered, the word a choked, strangled sound. No, that's not possible. That's a lie. The man in the suit, Mr. Chen, turned his cool gaze upon her. I assure you it is very possible. I am David Chen, Mr. Vance's chief counsel. And you, I presume, are Karen Fletcher. Yes, Karen stammered, her eyes darting between the impeccably dressed lawyer and the man she had just called a piece of filth. The man who was now looking at her with an expression of calm, final judgment. Mr. Vance is a man who values first-hand experience, Mr. Chen explained, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. He was in your neighborhood today to assess potential community investment opportunities. He was considering a multi-million-dollar grant to revitalize this block, with a focus on preserving small, independent businesses. This bookstore was his first stop. Amara felt her knees go weak. She gripped the counter for support, her mind reeling. The man she had given her last $10 to was a billionaire. The man she had protected was one of the most powerful men in the country. It didn't make sense. It was the stuff of fantasy, of the very books that lined her shelves. Mr. Chen continued, his eyes locked on Karen's terrified face. Mr. Vance is the sole proprietor of the V-Star Holding Group. I believe you are familiar with them. Karen's breath hitched. V-Star Holding Group was the anonymous, faceless corporation that owned almost all of the commercial real estate on Elm Street. They were her landlord, her primary investors, the source of all her power and influence. V-Star owns this building, Mr. Chen stated simply. It owns the building your office is in. It is the primary financial backer for your Fletcher Luxury Lofts project. He paused for dramatic effect. In short, Ms. Fletcher, you work for Mr. Vance. The collapse was total. Karen Fletcher, the storm, the shark, the force of nature, seemed to shrink in on herself. Her shoulders slumped. A low, guttural sound of pure horror escaped her lips. The arrogance and entitlement that had defined her were stripped away in an instant, leaving behind only a raw, pathetic core of fear. No, she whimpered, shaking her head in frantic denial. No, it's a mistake. A misunderstanding. Elias Vance finally spoke again, his voice soft, yet carrying the finality of a judge's gavel. There is no misunderstanding. I saw everything I needed to see. I saw a community's heart in this young woman, he said, gesturing to Amara. And I saw a sickness in you. He bent down and picked up Karen's phone from the floor. The screen was cracked, but the live stream was still running. The viewer count was now approaching 3 million. The comment section was a frantic, scrolling waterfall of shock, outrage, and condemnation for Karen. Elias held the phone up, his face filling the frame. For those of you watching, he said, his voice calm and steady, my name is Elias Vance. You have just witnessed a display of appalling prejudice and cruelty. You have seen a good, decent person being humiliated for an act of simple kindness. Let this be a lesson. Character is not determined by the clothes you wear or the money in your pocket. It is determined by how you treat people when you believe no one of importance is watching. He then turned the phone back towards a trembling Karen Fletcher. As for you, Miss Fletcher, he said, his voice now turning cold as steel, your association with all of my enterprises is terminated, effective immediately. Mr. Chen stepped forward, holding a sleek tablet. Your office lease is revoked under the moral turpitude clause. All funding for your development projects is being pulled. A press release detailing the reasons for this dissolution is being sent to every major news outlet as we speak. You will be hearing from our legal team regarding the slander and harassment you have just perpetrated, both against this establishment and against Mr. Vance personally. But my career, Karen whispered, her face a crumpled mess of tears and mascara. My life, it's over. You built your life on a foundation of arrogance and cruelty, Elias said, his voice leaving no room for argument. Such structures are not built to last. Just then, 2 uniformed police officers entered the bookstore. They had clearly been summoned by Mr. Chen's team. They approached Karen calmly. "Ma'am," one of the officers said, "we've received a complaint of harassment and public disturbance. We need you to come with us." The finality of it all broke her. Karen let out a wretched sob, a sound of utter defeat. The officers gently took her by the arms and escorted her out of the store, her sobs echoing in the now silent room. Through the front window, Amara could see her being placed in the back of a police car. The black sedans were already pulling away, disappearing as quietly as they had arrived. The storm had passed. The phone on the floor finally died, its screen going dark. The spectacle was over. The few customers who had witnessed the entire ordeal burst into spontaneous, thunderous applause. It was a sound of relief, of catharsis, of a great wrong being made right. They cheered for Amara. They cheered for Elias. They cheered for the simple, stunning victory of decency. Amara herself was still in a state of profound shock. She looked at Elias Vance, this unbelievable figure standing in the middle of her humble shop, and felt a wave of dizziness. He was no longer a disheveled, homeless man. He was a king in disguise. He walked over to her, his expression softening. The immense power he wielded seemed to recede, replaced once again by the gentle kindness she had first seen in his eyes. "I believe I owe you for a sandwich," he said with a small smile. Amara let out a shaky laugh that was half a sob. I think we can call it even." Elias's smile widened. He then looked around the shop, at the worn-out chairs, the overflowing shelves, the peeling paint. But he didn't see a dingy, failing business. He saw its soul. "Your parents built something wonderful here," he said softly. "A place of kindness and sanctuary. It should be protected. It should be celebrated." He turned to Mr. Chen, who was waiting patiently by the door. "David," he said, "let's fix this." Mr. Chen nodded and approached the counter, placing his tablet on its surface. He tapped the screen a few times, his movements precise and efficient. "Ms. Washington," he began, his tone formal but not unkind. "First, on behalf of Mr. Vance and his organization, I want to formally apologize for the distress Ms. Fletcher has caused you. Her behavior was reprehensible and will not be tolerated." "Thank you," Amara whispered, still struggling to process everything. "Second," Mr. Chen continued, "Mr. Vance would like to rectify your current financial situation. The outstanding rent on this property, as well as all associated late fees, have been forgiven. The eviction notice is null and void." A wave of relief so powerful it almost buckled Amara's knees washed over her. The pink notice in her pocket, which had felt like a death sentence, was now just a piece of paper. The immediate threat was gone. She could breathe again. But Mr. Chen was not finished. He was just getting started. "Furthermore," he said, "Mr. Vance believes that a person who cultivates community the way you do should not be burdened by the whims of a landlord. As of 5 minutes ago, the deed for this entire building, the commercial space downstairs and the 2 residential apartments upstairs, has been transferred into your name. It is yours. Free and clear, with all property taxes prepaid for the next 20 years. Amara's jaw dropped. She stared at him, then at Elias, unable to form words. Own the building? The entire building? It was a concept so far beyond her reality that her mind couldn't grasp it. It was like being told she now owned the moon. I don't know what to say, she stammered. You don't have to say anything, Elias said gently. You already said it all when you gave a cold, hungry man a sandwich you couldn't afford to part with. Mr. Chen swiped to another screen on his tablet. Mr. Vance was, as I mentioned, planning a significant community investment. He has decided to move forward with that plan, but with a new focus. He is establishing the Washington Literacy Foundation, a nonprofit organization dedicated to supporting independent bookstores, community libraries, and literacy programs for underprivileged children throughout the state. He looked directly at Amara. The foundation will be seeded with an initial endowment of $25 million. Amara felt the room spin. $25 million. The number was astronomical, meaningless in its sheer scale. And Mr. Vance would like to appoint you as its first executive director, Mr. Chen concluded. The position comes with a full staff, an office of your choosing, though we assume you might want it here, and an annual salary of $250,000, plus full benefits. The silence in the bookstore was absolute. The other customers stared, their mouths agape. Amara felt as though she had been struck by lightning. $250,000. A year. More money than she had ever dreamed of seeing in her entire lifetime. Tears, this time not of shame or fear, but of overwhelming, earth-shattering gratitude, streamed down her face. She looked at Elias Vance, this quiet, unassuming man who had just dismantled her problems and rebuilt her world in the span of 15 minutes. "Oh, why?" she finally managed to ask, the word choked with emotion. "Why me?" Elias stepped closer, his blue eyes full of a sincere, profound respect. "Because, Amara," he said, his voice resonating with a deep moral clarity, "you passed the test. In a world that is increasingly telling us to look away, to protect ourselves, to fear the other, you chose to see a human being. You chose compassion over suspicion. You chose kindness over self-interest. That is a quality rarer and more valuable than all the money in my bank accounts. That is leadership, and I want to invest in it." He gestured around the bookstore. "This place will be the foundation's headquarters. My team will handle a full renovation, whatever you want. More shelves, new furniture, a state-of-the-art coffee bar. We will restock your inventory. We will hire staff to help you manage the day-to-day so you can focus on the foundation's work." His team was already moving. Mr. Chen was on the phone, issuing quiet, efficient commands. Another associate entered with a large box filled with gourmet groceries and essentials, placing it on the counter. Someone else discreetly took Amara's car keys, explaining they were taking her car for a full service and detailing, and that a loaner vehicle was waiting for her outside. It was a whirlwind of benevolent efficiency. The chaos of her struggling life was being systematically dismantled and replaced with a new, incredible reality of security and opportunity. Meanwhile, the world outside the bookstore was exploding. The video of the confrontation, captured from Karen's phone and reposted by thousands, had gone viral on a global scale. Hashtag kindness is king and hashtag buy Karen were trending worldwide. News vans were already beginning to clog Elm Street. The story of Karen Fletcher's downfall was swift and brutal. Fired from her position, evicted from her office, and facing a barrage of lawsuits from humiliated investors, her professional life was annihilated. The Business Improvement Association issued a public statement denouncing her actions and dissolving her leadership committee. Her husband, a prominent surgeon, filed for divorce the next day, citing irreparable public humiliation. She became a pariah, a living symbol of entitled prejudice. Her ruin was as spectacular and public as her attack on Amara had been. It was a form of ironic, perfect justice. But inside the Page and Pint, there was no gloating. There was only a quiet sense of wonder. Amara, finally finding her voice, stepped forward and did the only thing that felt right. She wrapped her arms around Elias Vance and hugged him tightly. "Thank you," she sobbed into the shoulder of his worn jacket. "You have no idea what you've done." He returned the hug gently. "No, Amara," he said. "You have no idea what you've done." 6 months later, Elm Street was transformed. But not in the way Karen Fletcher had envisioned. It had not become a sterile canyon of luxury condos. It had become a vibrant, thriving heart of the community, and its center was a place now known as the Washington Corner. Amara's bookstore, the Page and Pint, was reborn. The renovation had been tasteful and loving, preserving the shop's cozy soul while upgrading its infrastructure. New oak shelves groaned under the weight of thousands of new books. A gleaming new espresso machine hissed happily behind the counter, managed by 2 new, smiling employees. The mismatched armchairs were still there, reupholstered and more comfortable than ever. The community cupboard was larger, overflowing with paid tickets. Amara herself was transformed. She stood in the center of her new office, a bright, airy space on the 2nd floor above the bookstore. The dark circles under her eyes were gone, replaced by a look of calm confidence. She was dressed in a simple but elegant dress, her hair styled in a way that was both professional and proud. She was no longer just surviving. She was thriving. She was reviewing grant proposals for the Washington Literacy Foundation. A small-town library needed a new roof. An inner-city school wanted to start a book club for at-risk teens. A mobile library needed funding to reach rural communities. With each proposal she approved, she felt a profound sense of purpose. She was taking the incredible gift she had been given and multiplying it, spreading it out, paying it forward on a scale she had never imagined. The story of that rainy afternoon had become a global phenomenon. It was taught in business ethics classes. It was cited in articles about corporate responsibility. Amara had been interviewed by national news programs, though she always steered the conversation away from herself and towards the work of the foundation. She wasn't a celebrity. She was a steward of kindness. Downstairs in the bustling bookstore, she saw a young boy, no older than 10, staring longingly at a thick fantasy novel. He counted the change in his small hand, his face falling as he realized he was a few dollars short. Amara smiled. She walked down the stairs and approached the boy. "That's a great book," she said gently. "One of my favorites." The boy looked up, his eyes wide. "You know," Amara said, leaning in as if sharing a secret, "we have a special today, for readers with excellent taste. That one's on the house." She took the book to the counter and signaled to her employee to ring it up as a foundation purchase. She handed the book to the boy, whose face lit up with pure, unadulterated joy. "Thank you," he beamed. "Thank you so much." "You're welcome," Amara said, her heart full. "Just promise me you'll share the story when you're done." As the boy ran out of the store, clutching his new treasure, Amara looked around at the world she had helped build. A world made possible by a single, simple act of kindness, on a cold and rainy day. Have you ever wondered about the true power of your actions? Have you ever walked past someone in need and felt that small pang, that quiet question of, what if I helped? This story is the answer to that question. It is a reminder that you never truly know the life of the person standing in front of you. You don't know their struggles, their history, or the immense potential for greatness that lies within them. The man who looks like a bum might be a king. The woman struggling to keep her dream alive might be the leader a community is waiting for. Every person you meet is the protagonist of their own complex, challenging story. And you, in any given moment, have a choice. You can be the villain. You can be the passive bystander. Or you can be the ally. You can be the one who offers a cup of coffee, a warm meal, a kind word. You may not change the world. You may not be rewarded with a multi-million-dollar foundation. But you might just save someone's day. You might just restore someone's faith in humanity. And sometimes, that is the greatest reward of all. Amara Washington learned that the truest measure of wealth isn't what you have in your bank account, but what you have to give from your heart. Her story is not just a fairy tale. It is a challenge to all of us. Now go be someone's hero.